Okay, let's talk about arrays. So array is just another word for list, and let's walk through a few examples of array usages. So you can have an empty array, and you can have a two-dimensional array. You can even have a three-dimensional array, and in theory you could just keep on nesting arrays inside of arrays as much as you want, but usually you don't do this. This is just for an example. And then you have an array of numbers, an array of strings, an array of objects, an array of regexes, and a mixed array. So you can actually just mix and match any type of data inside of an array. They're that flexible. Okay, let's talk a little bit about array operations. So the first thing we want to learn is how to add something to an empty array. And it's pretty easy. So you create an empty array, and then you go to the first position in that array. And what's useful to know about arrays is that they actually start counting from 0 and up, and not from 1. That's very useful, remember that. And then we add a 2, and then a 3. And finally we're left with an array that contains the values 1, 2, 3. If we want to get back something from this array, we simply do this. We reference the index that we're interested in. In this case we want the last thing, which is a 3, and then we'll get that back. We can also overwrite things. So let's say that we have an array with stuff in it, and then we say, well, there's a 1 here and a 2, but I want to change those values. So I add a foo and a bar to those positions. Then what's going to happen is that if I want to get back my values, now 0 is going to be foo and 1 is going to be bar, but since I didn't overwrite the last value, this last value is still going to be 3. One of the most useful properties an array has is its length property. And the length property returns the number of items that you can find in the array. So if you have 3 items, you get a 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, and as you can imagine, well, if it's an empty array, you're going to get back 0. This is a very simple concept, but it's extremely useful. Okay, let's talk a little bit about array functions. These are the functions that you will be using most of the time when you're working with arrays. The first one is push, which adds an element to the end of the array. And then you have unshift, which adds it at the front of the array. Then we have pop, which removes the last element. And then you have shift, which removes the first element. And then we have slice. And slice takes a starting position and an end position and returns a new array that only holds the elements that are found in that range. So for 0 and 1 in this case, it's going to be a 1. For 1 to 2, it's going to be the number 2. And if you give it the whole range, it's just going to return, you know, the original array. Okay, let's talk about the for each function. So if I wanted to walk over all the items in an array and do something with them, I would use a for each loop. So it takes a function, and that function takes an item input, which can be any type of value. In this scenario, it's going to be a 1 first, and then an empty array, and then the string foo. And all I want to do is log that out to the console. So if I go to my browser, I copy paste in this code and I run it, as you can see, the first thing we get is a 1, and then we get the empty array, and then we get the string foo, and undefined is just a default browser behavior. It has nothing to do with our list. So there you go, that's a for each. Okay, let's talk about map. So map is a function that takes a function which in turn takes a value of some sort, and it expects you to return something, and whatever you return will become the new value. And what that means is that in this scenario we take a number and we add 1 to it. So what's going to happen is that 1 is going to become 2, 2 is going to become a 3, and 3 is going to become a 4. And then we're left with a new array that has these new values. Right, let's talk about filter. So filter is a function that takes a function and some value, and it expects you to return a Boolean value. So whatever you return, whether it's true or false, the behavior is going to change. If you return true, the value is going to stay in the array. If you return a false, it's going to be removed from the new array that's going to be created. So let's say that we go over 1 here, and we check, is the number that we're getting, is that bigger than 1? Well, 1 isn't bigger than 1, it's equal, so this is going to be a false, which means that the 1 is now not going to be included in the new array. Then we come to a 2, well that's going to be true because that's bigger than 1, and then a 3. So what's going to happen is that we're going to be left with a new array that only has 2 and 3. Okay, let's talk about reduce. So reduce takes a function and an initial value of some sort. And the reason for that is that the anonymous function you provide requires an accumulator and some type of value. So in this scenario, we want to sum all of the values. So the accumulator represents, at the first iteration, the 0. So this would be 0 plus 1, and then you would return that, which returns a 1. And then you go to the second element, which would be 2, and then 1. And you would continue this process until you hit the end of the array. And this would sum all the values, giving us a total of 6. Reduce has a little bit of more functionality than that, though. So let's say that we had an array of elements, and for whatever reason we want to convert this array to another array. Well, then we would give it an array as the accumulator. So this would be an array, and this is our number. And then we do accumulator.push number. So we add it into the array, and then we return that array. And this will give us a new array that has the exact same values. This is not something you commonly do. This is a little bit of a contrived example just to give you an idea of how it works, right? And finally, let's say that we wanted to do something really fancy, right? So we want to get an object back from all of this. So we go through the array 1, 2, 3, and accumulator is now an object. And then we get our number. So what we do is that we go into the object and we assign the number key to the number value, which in the first iteration will be, so key 1 is going to be equal to 1, and then key 2 is equal to 2, and then 3 is equal to 3. As long as we return that the accumulator, we keep adding stuff to it, and then we will be left with an object that has 1, 1, 2, 2, and 3, 3.